Hello, welcome back to our Python course. We are discussing Matplotlib, and today we have a few more data visualization projects. I will not go into too many details with those because we have already discussed Matplotlib twice. So now we will only talk about things that are different or interesting about these particular examples. The first one is an example typical for the humanities. You count the statistics of the appearance of words in a text. This can be useful. For example, you want to identify an author of a piece, so you take Shakespeare, you analyze the frequency at which particular words appear in the text, and then you know this is Shakespeare's style. And later, when you go to a different piece that you don't know if it's from Shakespeare or not, you can just look at the frequency distribution of the words and decide, this is also Shakespeare or this is not Shakespeare. So this is one way to use this. You can also use it for many other things. You can use it together with sentiment analysis to find out whether, for example, internet articles over time have become more pessimistic or something, right? By counting the frequency of words that are pessimistic and then making a graph out of it. So these graphs we will talk about now. What we do here is to take the first chapter of Alice in Wonderland, where Alice and the rabbit appear, and we just want to count the appearances of Alice and the rabbit. Now the thing is, since we want to count over the chapter, we don't want to have just the total number of appearances of Alice and the rabbit. This will not be very instructive. What we want is to see how this develops over time. And so we have to decide on some unit of the text that will be counted every time. So if I count the whole text, I just get one number. Alice appears, 52 times, the rabbit appears 37. This is not what I want. I want to have the development over time. Now, if I take two small units, if I take words, for example, I would either have 0 or 1. Either the word is Alice, then it's 1, or it's 0, then it's not Alice. Also doesn't help me. If I take lines, it will be more or less the same. Alice probably does not appear more than once in a line. So again, it doesn't help. So I need to make my units of text so that I can get the information I want. In this case, I will probably use something like 10 lines, and then I count how often in the first block of 10 lines I have Alice, how often do I have the rabbit. Then I take the next 10 lines and look what happens there. Then I take the next 10 lines, and in this way I get individual data points, the first 10 lines, the second 10 lines, the third 10 lines, and I can see the development over time. So how many lines you take, of course, how many data points you want is your decision, depending on how fine-grained you want your graph to be, while still being meaningful, right? Okay, so in this case, we make these text chunks of 10 lines, and you will see how to divide the text in chunks and how to measure these things in a moment. So let's go through. First thing is the text for the exercise. I've just copied this from the internet, and you see we're using 3 quotes because this is now a long quote that goes over multiple lines. 3 quotes allows you to do this. And we'll just go down and the text ends here. So this is one chapter. Of course, you would normally not do this, put it into a quote. You would upload it from a file. This would be easier and more convenient. And then you could upload the whole book without having to paste it into your Google Colab notebook. But in this case, I didn't want to also bother with opening files and selecting files and so on, just to keep it easy and focus on the Matplotlib and the statistical analysis. So I just put the text in there. But I just tell you, if you do it for real, of course, you get this text from a file. Okay, and then I import, as always, my Matplotlib, and I also import math because I need it for some calculations later. And then I prepare my data. What I'm doing here is to read my text, right? And then after I have my text, I split it into lines. This is what this does. So the \n is a line end character, a new line character, and this comes at the end of every line. And so if I split a new line, I get every line in one element of my list. If I use split without that, I will split it into words, then I have individual words, which is not what I want, right? I want lines here because I'm counting lines and I want to count chunks of lines. So then later I will take 10 lines together as a chunk, and this requires me to have lines in the first place, right? So I'm splitting at line ends. And then I'm stripping these lines because I remove, strip, you remember, removes white space at the beginning and end. So if the lines are indented, I don't want to have all this white space. So you just remove that too. And this gives you finally lines, which is exactly this. It's lines stripped and separated from each other and put into a long list. Now we have already said that we want chunks of 10 lines, so I have a variable chunk size. So this variable is just there if I want to change my chunk size. I want to have 20 or 30 lines, I can easily change it by assigning it here. And then I have to calculate how many chunks will I need. So I divide the length of the lines list, how many lines I have, by the chunk size, and then I will get how many lines per chunk I have. But I don't want to have quarter chunks or thirds of chunks. I want to have full numbers of chunks, even if the last chunk is not full. So this is why I use this mathematical function ceil, which gives me the ceiling. It gives me the next full number that follows the number I have there from this division. So if the number is 2.5, then the ceiling will give me 3. Even if the number is, 25.1, it will give me 26. So it always rounds up. This is what ceiling does. And this is what I want here. I want to have the next full chunk. So the number of chunks is the ceiling, the next rounded up number from the length of my total number of lines divided by the chunk size. And then I hold also in lists my Alice mentions and my rabbit mentions and the chunk labels, because later I have to plot them and I need to know which chunk I am looking at. So I need to label my chunks. Okay. Let's go through now the text in chunks. And what happens here is for I in range num chunks. You remember we talked about range recently, where you have a counter that goes through all these chunks. So here I have the number of chunks, which is, let's say I have 5 or 10 chunks. And then for I in range num chunks, we'll let the I go from 0 to num chunks minus 1, right? So if I have 10 chunks, I get a counter here. I goes from 0 to 9. The start now within the array of lines is I times chunk size. So if I'm at the first chunk, my starting point will be 0. If I am at the second chunk, which has an I of 1, my chunk will start at 1 times chunk size. If my chunk size is 10 lines, then it will start at 10. My first chunk goes from 0 to 9. My second one goes from 10 to end. And the end, next line, is start plus chunk size. And the end is, again, one more than I want. So remember that, because when I do later, I will use a slice to get this out. And the slice always has a number at the end that is one more than you actually want. This is why if I start with 0, with I0, I have start at 0 plus chunk size is 10, so I get the lines 0 to 9. If my start is 10, then I have 10 plus 10 is 20, so in reality I get 10 to 19. Okay, and so now my chunk text is space, join, lines, start, end. And this is a function that we have not yet talked about, but I will show it to you later. Joins lines with a separator that you can define as you like it. In this case, we use as a separator the space. So the syntax of this is a string that you want to use a separator, dot, from this string, you use a method called join, and this now will join the elements of the list that you give it into one string using that string, of which join is a method, as the separator. So this is a very strange construct that is somehow the wrong way around. Instead of beginning with what you want to join and then saying what the separator is, which would be, more the same way you expect this to work. You start with the separator and then say what you want to join with this separator. Anyway, this is how it works. So a separator is a space, and we join all the lines from start to end. This means that we get only one line in the end, where the different lines, previous lines, are now separated with a space. So you get one long string that's all one line. And this is okay, this is what we want, because we're just going to count the appearances of Alice and the rabbit in there, so we don't care for any line ends. And this is what we do next, right? We count, Alice count is chunk text count Alice and rabbit count chunk text count rabbit. So we use the count method of the string object to count the number of words, of particular words in there. And then we append the count to the Alice mentions list. Why do we do this? Because every time we count only the appearances within one chunk of text. But in the next iteration of the for loop, everything will be overwritten again, right? Then I count the appearances of Alice in the next chunk of text. So now I need somewhere to remember what was in the previous chunk. And this is what is this Alice mentions. This keeps my Alice mentions for the first chunk, the second chunk, the third chunk, because I always keep appending them there, right? And so the Alice mentions list at position 0 has the Alice mentions in block 0 in my first chunk. The Alice mentions in position index 1 has the Alice mentions in my second chunk, and so on, right? So I keep this as a memory of how many times Alice appears in each chunk. So in the end, Alice mentions will have as many elements as I have chunks, and the same with the rabbit, and they will be in order, the mentions of Alice and the rabbit in each chunk. And so finally, I have the chunk labels and I append I+1 to this. This is just to give me for every chunk a label, because later I want to print them in a diagram. And you remember with matplotlib, I have my data in one list and I have my X data in the other list. And in this case, we want my X data is just the number of the chunk and my Y data is how many times was Alice mentioned. So I need the number of the chunk somewhere. And this is what I remember here. So I just append the number of each chunk, but because Python counts internally from 0 and I want in my diagram the count to start as 1, because it would be strange, right? We humans don't count from 0. So if you say my first chunk is chunk number 1, makes more sense, right? So I just append I+1. I just count +1, everything. Yeah, and that's it. And now I'm ready to plot the whole thing, and the rest of the plotting code you know already. I have different markers here in my plot. I plot the Alice and the rabbit in the same plot. That's also something we did not do before, but we are doing it here. So I have two plots in the same graph. I have a marker O for Alice and a marker S, which is the square, right, for the rabbit. I add a few labels and so on, and I display the whole thing. So now let's go and execute the whole thing, and I go back to start from the beginning because I have not yet executed all these pieces of the code, right? I need first my chapter text, and after I have that, I need to execute this here. I need to do it in order, otherwise I don't have it, right? And then now I'm here, and I am going through the text in chunks, and now I plot the data, and so let's execute this too. And you see that now I get down here my plot. And this is exactly what I wanted. This gives me the mentions of Alice and the rabbit. You see another little feature here on the right side, top right in this diagram. You see Alice mentions and rabbit mentions, the little legend. And this is what you see here, PLT legend. This line is what produces that. So it tells you what your markers mean. This is very nice. Okay, that's that. And we see how this develops here. It starts down here. You see our chunk labels, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 until 12. And you see that the whole thing starts with Alice, who is blue. is not mentioned at all in chunk 5 and 8, but is mentioned in between, and then you have the rabbit mentioned in the beginning and mentioned in the end, and in the middle of the chapter the rabbit is absent. So it's not so interesting now what the result is, but you see how to make such a diagram, how to create this. Okay, here's a short explanation what join is doing, and I will give you this example here. So this is the first sentence, this is another 1 and 2. I have 2 sentences, and then I have join 1, 2. The elements of this list are 1 and 2, and I join them with nothing first, right? So I just stick them together, and then I join them with a space, I join them with 3 dashes, and I join them with a new line character. And you see how this turns out here, right? These are different ways of joining the elements of a list. You can also see this down here, the shopping list. What will this do if I execute it? Think about it for a second before I do it. I'm joining the elements of this shopping list. Of course, it will give me the elements of my list separated with a comma and a space. Okay, the next thing we will do, we have star rating versus sentiments. We have what Goodreads or Amazon does. We have some star ratings where a book is rated, a hotel is rated, and then we have a comment in the sentiment. And I have here my review data. The star ratings are these 5, 1, 4, 5, and so on. And I have reviews, an equal number, and I want to have a plot that shows the correlation between them. So let us start by executing this so that we have the data that we will need later. It has been executed, okay. And now I can go down here, and this time we will be using predefined column maps. So we have the text blob, we have our ratings, we put the ratings into lists. These are all things that you know how to do. For text in reviews, we have a text blob, and we take the polarity score out. And if you want to see this code, and if you want to have this discussion with the code in front of you, where you can also try it and execute it, then go to my Substack, which I will put the address here in the video, and it's also down in the description. And there you can subscribe and get access to all these written materials, to all the code, so you don't have to actually read the code now on screen. And then we have a scatter plot, and the only new thing here in this scatter plot is that we have the C parameter here, and the C is the color, and the color should be based on the star ratings. This is what I'm saying here. The color is the star ratings, and the color map is the next line, is the color map Viridis. So this is the name of a color map, and this maps every number in star ratings to some color. And there are different color maps that I've commented here, so you can use them by removing the comment. And you will see how this is automatically now colored. So let's just try this. I will execute this. Here we go, and this is what the color map is doing. You see we have the polarity, and we have the star rating, and the star rating now determines the color, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And this color map will automatically take our range and assign all the values in this range to this sequence of colors from, in this case, from purple to yellow. And I can change the color map. I can use another color map. Let's use another one. So instead of the Viridis map, now I will put a command here, and instead let's take the cool warm color map. I can execute it and go down to see what this looks like. And then I go down to see what this looks like. Here we go. And my color map now goes from cool to warm, from blue to red. And this is what you would use, for example, if you wanted to plot temperatures or something. So you have various color maps in various colors, and they are arranged in different ways. And this allows you to easily color your graphs without having to specify 50 colors yourself. Of course, you can always do it manually, but it just takes a long time. It's much easier to use the predefined color maps. And there are lots of color maps. Here is a list. You can stop the video here and have a look at this list. Blues, greens, oranges, purples. And then some color maps are progressive, like we saw with this heat color map, where it goes from one color to the other and then you have a continuum in between. But others are intentionally not contiguous color. So you have color maps where there are 4 colors always alternating one after the other, and they are very contrasty to each other. And this is, for example, if you want to paint a map, let's say, where adjacent countries should not have the same color. So this allows you to do that. You get a color map where if you paint adjacent countries one by one, you will have a different contrasting color for every one. And here is a description of these different color maps. I'm not going to do this now. It's all here, and you will find this on my Substack. As I said, I put the address here, tomorrow's teaching, the Substack. Okay, so next thing, visualizing sentence structure with a pie chart. This is a text blob function. Text blob has the ability to not only give us sentiments, but it can also give us parts of speech of sentences, and it can divide the sentence into verbs, adjectives, nouns, other parts of speech, and you have them all here, right? Nouns, singular, nouns, plural, proper nouns, singular, adjectives, verbs, adverbs, determiners, personal pronouns, cardinal numbers, coordinating conjunctions. I don't even know what most of these things are. Anyway, you see examples here on the right side in case you also don't know what these are. So this is from the documentation. And with this, now we can analyze sentences and assign these parts of speech. And this is what's happening here. So first I have to do my imports. I import matplotlib, I import text blob, and I import NLTK, which is the natural language toolkit. And then the natural language toolkit has to download the data it needs for my language. So of course this will be different if you do German or Italian from when you do English. So this is why you have here the right dictionary that it needs to do its job in English. After this is done, I have my sentence. It was a bright cold day in April. And I have a longer sentence down here also. So you can just assign multiple sentences, then one overrides, the later one overrides the earlier one, right? So here I'm testing with the second sentence, which is a little longer. And then I get the parts of speech and print them. So let us see what this looks like. And I found that this is not always very precise. So this parts of speech thing does not always work very well. But you see, it gets confused by the quote. It says the other quote is a noun phrase. It says, thought, Alice, to, herself, and so on. And they are all tagged with a part of speech that they are. Anyway, for us now, what I want to do, I'm a philosopher, I'm not a linguist, so I don't know all these different ways. But what we are doing here is to just print some of them, plot some of them in a pie chart. And the only interesting thing for us now, because we are dealing with matplotlib, is the pie chart. So here is how the pie chart works. plt.py gives you a pie chart, and the first thing is the sizes, where you give list with the sizes of the whole that you want, right? And then I give the labels. I have this formatting how to print the percentages inside the different sectors of this pie chart. The start angle, where do I start printing? This goes in degrees, right, around the pie chart. And then the colors that I'm going to use, a color map, right? Gold, light sky blue, and so on. And then I put some of those labels again, like in every chart. And so now I can see the result. Let's go down and look at the result. Here's my pie chart. So if you want to know what all this in detail how this works and how we count these things, then go to my Tomorrow's Teaching Substack. You can see the text, you can see all the code there, you can analyze it yourself and learn even more than what you can from these videos. Thank you and see you next time. Bye-bye.